On day 65 of Donald Trump's illegal war, Donald Trump threatened another war crime, this time telling a Fox reporter in a telephone interview that Iran will be, quote, blown off the face of the earth if Iran attacks United States Navy ships in the region. Donald Trump's war became fully illegal last week, and Donald Trump seems to know that.
What they call a military operation, you know, they don't like the word war, and they call it a military operation because that way you don't have a war, you don't have legal problems.
Legal problems. That was day 62 of Donald Trump's war, and he had a legal problem. By the time Donald Trump said that, even Donald Trump seemed to know that the War Powers Act passed in 1973 made Donald Trump's war illegal last week. The War Powers Act says that the president can launch military operations for a maximum of 60 days, quote, unless the Congress has declared war or has enacted a specific authorization for such use of United States armed forces. And today, on the 65th day of Donald Trump's illegal war, he chose this childish language to continue his violation of the War Powers Act.
Our country's booming now, despite the fact that we're in I call it a mini war.
A mini war. On Friday, Donald Trump described his defiance of the War Powers Act.
But you ever hear a situation where we're knocking the hell out of somebody and we have a Congress, please, you've only got 3 days left. We spent 19 years in Vietnam. We spent 12 years in Iraq. We spent 7 years in another place, 2 years in another one, 7 years in another one. We had another one for 14 years, and we're in there for 6 weeks. What's taking so long?
Without ever specifically mentioning the War Powers Act, Congress learned its lesson with Vietnam, the war that Donald Trump refused to participate in when offered a chance by his local draft board, whereupon he presented a letter from a doctor saying that Donald Trump's feet just couldn't take a day in army boots anywhere in the world. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution passed the House of Representatives and the Senate in 1964. The vote was unanimous in the House and only 2 senators voted no. Both bodies voted on the same day. They literally did not know what they were voting for. They thought they did. They thought they knew why they were voting and what they were voting for. They voted for the president to use military force against what the resolution called, quote, the communist regime in Vietnam, and quote, because President Lyndon Johnson told Congress that North Vietnamese forces, as the resolution put it, quote, deliberately and repeatedly attacked United States naval vessels lawfully present in international waters. History would prove that was a wild exaggeration of a very minor incident in the Gulf of Tonkin. But the Congress immediately passed that resolution saying, quote, the Congress approves and supports the determination of the President as Commander-in-Chief to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. It was a one-page resolution, and the final sentence said, quote, this resolution shall expire when the President shall determine that the peace and security of the area is reasonably assured. In other words, there was no expiration date, and the resolution put no limit on what the President could do. And so President Lyndon Johnson took a minor military engagement at sea and turned it into America's biggest war since World War II. 4 years later, in the deadliest year of the Vietnam War in 1968, for American forces, the United States Army had 500,000 soldiers in Vietnam. Republican President Richard Nixon won the presidential election that year and continued Lyndon Johnson's war in Vietnam without limit and expanded that war across borders into other neighboring countries. Members of Congress came to regret their vote for the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, and during the Nixon presidency began doing everything they possibly could to cut off funding for what had become Richard Nixon's war. The concept of the illegal war in American politics was born in Vietnam. Prosecutors of the illegal war concept held that the reporting of the Gulf of Tonkin incident in the first place by the president was false in describing a minor encounter at sea as an act of war. Therefore, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution as passed was based on a fraud, and that the Gulf of Tonkin resolution could not have reasonably been taken as an authorization for an unlimited forever war. By 1973, Congress was no longer content to reduce funding for the Vietnam War. They wanted to prevent the next Vietnam by writing into American law an unambiguous 60-day limit on the kind of war making that President Lyndon Johnson created after years of Lyndon Johnson's war, which had become Richard Nixon's war. Members of Congress were insisting that what the president was doing without a declaration of war was illegal. Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon never pretended that it wasn't a war. They never called it a little detour, as Donald Trump did recently. They never called it an excursion, as Donald Trump has called it. And they never pretended that it was just a military operation. And they never claimed that it would be over next week. President Johnson and President Nixon did not spend every week of their war in Vietnam claiming that it would end tomorrow or the next day or the next week. And they never said we could leave right now.
Right now, if we left right now, it would take them 20 years, 25 years to rebuild the place.
No American president acting as commander-in-chief in wartime has ever said that he could end that war right now, because every previous president serving as commander-in-chief knew that it was his moral and legal responsibility and constitutional responsibility to end that war on the first day possible and not extend it one day beyond. What was absolutely necessary? Not risk one more life. Quote, it would take them 20 years, 25 years to rebuild that place. The complete rebuilding of the first place on planet Earth to be hit by an atomic bomb took 10 years. Hiroshima was rebuilt in 10 years. Nagasaki was rebuilt in 10 years after. Being hit by the second atomic bomb used in war, which was the last nuclear weapon used in war. Larger Japanese cities like Tokyo had been bombed so thoroughly before the United States had a working atomic bomb that there weren't enough structures left in Tokyo to use it as a target for an atomic bomb. But Tokyo was rebuilt in 10 years, and Japan led that effort, that rebuilding effort across the country, without a huge stream of oil revenue that Iran could have after Donald Trump's war. So no, it won't take 20 years or 25 years to rebuild what Donald Trump has done to Iran. On day 62 of Donald Trump's war, he did this. He posted an AI image of himself with no caption to explain such a perverse choice of imagery for a president of the United States, or for any adult, but certainly for a president of the United States who is now a wartime president. No president has ever taken war less seriously, and America does not approve. New polling continues to show Donald Trump to be waging the most unpopular war in American history on its 65th day. 65 days after the Gulf of Tonkin resolution in 1964. President Johnson had the overwhelming support of Congress in the Vietnam War and very strong majority support among voters for the Vietnam War.
We have a war right now, and we're to like, what, 6 weeks? They said, what's taking so long? We were in Vietnam 19 years. We're in Iraq for many years, 10 years, 12 years. We were in all these different wars. Korea, 7 years. I won't even mention World War II. That's a big baby. But you had the wrong person up here, you'll be in World War III. As sure as you're sitting there, you have the wrong person up there. It's nasty and tricky. It's tricky out there.
Donald Trump is the first president in history to wage a war that a majority of Americans have opposed from day one. The New York Times reports, quote, the Middle East troops faltered on Monday as the United Arab Emirates said it had been attacked by Iran, while the U.S. military said that it had destroyed 6 Iranian military boats, and that Iran had fired on American ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Admiral Brad Cooper, the head of the Military Central Command, said that U.S. warships shot down cruise missiles and drones that Iran fired at the ships and commercial vessels the Navy was guiding through the Strait of Hormuz. And today, Donald Trump, who has spent every day of his war trying to oversimplify his war, finally seems to be learning. It's tricky out there. Retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling will join us after this break.